Okay, we have officially been called to order some time ago. We've been in an executive session, so we'll move directly into the presentation for tonight. Dr. Dixon, you want to introduce us to what we're doing?
Yes, good evening to all our guests. Tonight we have our second part of our data workshop. Reminder, last time Allison Bird took us through two parts of our data presentation. It was decided that two pieces would be the best way to break it up so there's a clear understanding of what the data says. And tonight she's going to take us a little deeper dive in what the data states, but what we're doing in our district to address some of these data points. So tonight I think you will find it more enriching and applicable to the day-to-day instructional programs that we have in our buildings. Okay? All right, Ms. Bird.
Thank you again for the opportunity to present in front of you. I am going to do a brief recap on our earlier sessions this year, just because there are some new people in the audience. And as Dr. Dixon indicated, part two of a two-part session on the state report cards. So in March, we began our discussion with a work session where we looked at different types of data that guide our work. So we talked about internal measures, which are those that stem from the classroom and the school level, and external measures like the state report card and state testing that we're going to look at. During our retreat in July, we looked at state testing data, so we had some preliminary results at that time, and focused on putting the data in context by answering three questions. So the first question that we are working to answer is, how do we perform compared to the overall goal or target? How do we perform compared to others? And then how do we perform compared to ourselves over time? This is also referenced as trend data or comparing. During the September work session, I provided a brief overview on Ohio State tests, so talking about the performance levels and the different tests that students will be taking in the school year. And then when looking at comparing our performance, we looked at other districts in the state of Ohio, districts in Cuyahoga County, and then specifically in the first Marine school districts. And then I also highlighted key learnings and areas of focus for 2017-2018. So some are not familiar with the first Marine district, so this slide was included just so that we know what we're talking about when we're talking about these 16 districts, Cleveland Heights included. So these are the suburbs or the school districts that surround the city of Cleveland. There's actually a first ring school superintendent's consortium or a group that was established back in 2000 to help these districts address some of the challenges that are related to poverty, mobility, and diversity that we see because of our location. So there are 6 total components with 10 measures on the Ohio State report card. And the report cards are published by the Ohio Department of Education each year. So the 2016-2017 report card was released by the Department of Education on September 14th. Last time we looked at gap closing, progress, and the K-3 literacy measure. This time we're going to focus on achievement, graduation rate, and prepare for success. So the achievement component is probably the most well-known and easiest to understand of all the different measures. It tells us if students are meeting grade level expectations. So there are 2 graded measures that are included with this particular component, and both look at student performance against the target. So one is indicators met, and that looks at how many students pass the test. So passing is defined as scoring proficient or higher on one of the state tests. And then in order to meet an indicator, 80% of the students who took the test must have scored proficient or higher. The second measure that's a part of the achievement component is the performance index. This again looks at how students did on each test, but by specific performance levels. So one of the things that we looked at during the last session was that there are 5 performance levels, with limited being the lowest, then basic, proficient, accelerated, and advanced. So if you were to pull up our report card on the department website, this is what you would see. The overall grade for achievements in the district is a D. When we look to put our information or our performance for this measure in the context, if we met the target, meaning if every student scored proficient, that would give us a B for performance index, an A for indicators met, and an overall grade of B. When we look at our performance over time, so again, comparing our performance against ourselves, looking at our work on over the last couple of years, you can see that diagrammed in the chart on the right. So performance remained pretty consistent during 2012-13, 13-14, 2014-15, or the bar in the middle there, we saw a slight drop in performance. This was also the first and only year of PART testing. Then you'll see another drop during 2015-2016. So again, we switched testing companies and went to all online. So different corporation preparing and publishing the test, and then a whole new format for administering the test. So 2016-2017, our second year with the same test and the same vendor and the same format, we do see a bump moving our overall letter grade from an F to a D.
When you say we, is that us or the state?
The district.
Okay.
This is Cleveland Heights University.
So what you're saying then, is, if I'm interpreting this data correctly, then is that our change in methodology, now these are the state's grades, correct?
Those are our grades, so that's the total points earned for the performance index over the years,
From the state?
based on the state test.
Okay, so our change of internal methodologies had a negative, is it safe to say that our change of methodologies had a negative impact on our overall test scores?
I do believe that switching formats from paper pencil to online had an impact on performance, as well as the changing from vendors. I would say that yes, that is.
Then another question I would pose is, what do we attribute the changing in the bandwidths? Because we can, I guess, we're seeing a lot of fluctuation, if you will. What do we attribute that to? Or what do you attribute it to?
I can't attribute it to one or two things in particular. I can state that the changing in the band colors represents the different number of students performing at each level. So
No, what I'm saying is the width of them is changing over time. What I'm looking for is, what variable or quality do you attribute the change in the number of students in those different levels?
So I would say for 2016, 2017, we decreased the number of students performing in the lowest range. So that's why you see the yellow band is smaller.
Mm-hmm.
And an increased performance, or increase the number of students scoring at the proficiency, accelerated, and advanced range. So that's why you see the orange and blue and the green that are larger.
So if I can craft the response to my question, that it would appear that the changing in the testing methodology had a negative impact on our overall test scores from the state of Ohio, and that as the students are getting acclimated to the methodology as well as our staff, that we're seeing an improvement in the numbers returning to the equilibrium of what we had previously.
I understand your question, Eric, and I understand the reason behind your question too, but in a scientific, just throwing a tiny bit of science into this, we're talking about if you change the methodology each year and you're changing this student space each year and you're changing, I don't know how you assign causality. I really don't understand how you can, in any accurate way, assign causality.
Well, that's the problem. Well, we could argue that with that's why the entire state methodology is flawed and ridiculous. Is that we cannot do. Whenever I ask for anything over more than 2 or 3 years, we can't do that because everything's constantly changing. So there's no point in having there's no ability to show any kind of linear component over 10 or 15 years because everything's constantly changing, not to mention the fact that your student population is always changing as well. But what I'm looking for is that we have to explain why. I'm looking for, if we're consistent, then boom, what I'm looking for is what is the variable possibly that has caused that impact. That's what I'm looking for.
Well, you might be looking in the wrong place. you know, we would agree that moving from pencil to electronic devices might have had an impact. And there are so many variables related to what happens in education that is not, and particularly when we look at the bands, are we raising the issue of whether the staff are teaching to the people who have a better opportunity, for example, to move into the accelerated range more so than the people in the limited or basic range? I don't think we have any data that helps us to support that in any way. And I don't know if you're suggesting that we ought to be collecting such data. I'm not sure.
What I'm looking at, the whole impetus for the question was, I've got 5 years of data being compared next to one another. I see a decline. I'm asking what's possibly a component of it. Now, the flip side is that the counter argument is that there's no way to test or find out. If there's so many variables that we can't identify a variable, then it begs the question of, then why are we, I hate to say it, it's a silly response and I hate to be a smartass, but then why even collect the data? Because, you see what I'm going with this.
Yeah, but just keep in mind that we do have a challenge, and the reason we have this data and the reason we're in a position to having to explain the data is one thing, and that is it's mandated by the state. So our challenge is to see if there's a way that we can get in front of or begin to anticipate or think about how we get our students in a better position to understand the environment that they're dealing with, our staff to understand it better. I mean, we have challenges, and I think part of what's happening is that we are always and continuously trying to meet those challenges and anticipate what those changes might look like. But I don't know that with the way the target is moving, I don't know if we're in a position to talk about causality yet.
Ron,
It does, I'm sorry.
no, go ahead.
I was gonna say, it does, though, if we think back to our March session, one of the reasons that we began to talk about or distinguish between external measures and internal measures.
Right.
So we do have greater control and greater understanding on more of those internal measures, and actually part of what we're gonna see today are some of those measures, and then talk about things that we're doing to not so much redefine, but additional data points that speak to what our teachers are doing, what our kids know, and the culture of excellence that respect.
What I was going to say, and I was going to be your straight man, but you just preempted my straight. So I guess what I would say is it does militate toward us creating internal measures that have some level of stability, because that's part of the problem, Eric. You're exactly right. Is that if everything keeps changing, as much as we might want to say it's because the test keeps changing, that's the problem. I can't come to that conclusion either.
Right.
So the only thing we have control over, we don't have control over what the state does. We can try our best, but at this point, that proves to be a ridiculous effort on our part. I think the best effort we can have is to create a stable set of ways to test our students that we believe in, that we believe test what we want them to see, and create some level of continuity so we can actually come to some level of conclusion.
Yes, and with that, we will take a look at those points to just. We'll pause for 2 seconds again, thinking about data and context. So when we look at performance across the state, we see a majority of districts performed either at the C or the D range. In Cuyahoga County, we see a greater distribution of grades for the achievement component. And then in first ring school districts, we see a majority of the districts scored like us with an overall D. And the numbers that you see in parentheses there for the first ring districts are actually the number of school districts. So there was one school district that earned the B, one that earned the C.
When you bring this slide up, I think this is probably the most important slide of the whole presentation. I mean, because the community, I want to think the community wants to compare us to other school districts. I mean, we could argue amongst ourselves if it's fair or not fair, but where do we sit with all the other school districts? when a D is an average and we got the average score across the state, I mean, I'm not going to say that's bad, I'm not going to say that's good.
It's part of putting the information in context.
Exactly.
And again, we're
And
still
it's-
working to balance that with measures that we do have greater control over and that we feel give a greater representation of the work that we're doing. So,
Could you go back to the last slide, please?
yes, I can.
If memory serves, the first string server that got the B was Cuyahoga Heights? Not Cuyahoga Fall, or
It's Cuyahoga Heights.
Cuyahoga Heights. Who was the C system? Do you recall?
That is Lakewood.
Lakewood, okay.
Lakewood.
Okay.
All right, so now the work that we're doing. So we are in the third year of implementation for our 5-year strategic plan, and the achievement component fits right in line with goal number 1. Last time we talked about our district adopted materials, so my colleagues in curriculum instruction have worked to pilot and adopt materials in English language arts, mathematics, and science. This year, they'll be coming back to you with recommendations for social studies and for world languages. We have, last year, with our elementary teams, we started grade level meetings and are continuing those sessions this school year with elementary teachers and working to expand to our middle school teams as well. So the first set of team meetings were held back in September, just before our last work session, and the second set were actually just last week. So, the benefits of these meetings, we have opportunity to look at student work. Teachers have a chance to talk to role-like teachers from other buildings. And during the last session, not only did we look at student work, discuss instructional strategies, but we also, for some of the groups, got a chance to look ahead at instruction, so to discuss what's coming up next. This year, under the leadership of the Assistant Superintendent, Felicia Gould, the Educational Services team is conducting school visits. So during the months of October and again in February, the team is walking classrooms with each school's building leadership teams. So the building team includes the principal and teacher leaders from across grade levels and across content areas. So on the day of the visit, the school team starts by sharing their building level plan, and that includes like the goals that they're working to meet. They also share look-fors in the areas of instruction, assessment, and climate. And this just means that they're telling us what they want feedback on. So the key components of their plan and what they're looking to implement in their classrooms are the look-fors. And just in anticipation of some of the questions, yes, staff are nervous about it, they are anxious, it feels uncomfortable, but after the first hour or so into the process, you can hear people say, oh wow, I wish everybody had the opportunity to do this. Okay, I've never gotten a chance to see my colleagues teach. Like, this is really informative. Actually, just yesterday, the team had an opportunity to visit Fairfax, and I was grouped with 3 teachers, and we were able to observe 6 different classrooms together. So some of their look-fors in instruction, they were asking us to see, what are the learning targets, or what are the things that students are expected to learn during that lesson. And because of their involvement with IBs, the International Baccalaureate Program, they were also looking for evidence of transdisciplinary units. And I will say that I am a secondary mathematics teacher, so my experience in the classroom was in the middle school and the high school level. And it is, it's amazing what elementary teachers are able to do. But just to have the dialogue with the teachers that we walk through with and to see their work in action, there were multiple examples of their look-fors. So it was, again, we were able to see teachers teaching, interaction between teachers and students and students. So more of those qualitative data points that we were talking about before in March that really speak to everything that our teachers and students do on a daily basis. Yes.
Yeah, a number of years ago, we were doing the educational rounds, which is, for those who don't know, it's similar to medical rounds where you take people I think are familiar with that from other TV shows where medical students go with an attending and residents to learn. Do you consider this similar to, you were here for the medical round?
I was here for instructional rounds, and I appreciate this method more. It feels, it is what it is. It feels more authentic. It feels, I feel like the feedback is I don't know how to describe it. This one just feels closer and more connected to the work that the team is doing. I felt because of the setup with instructional rounds, it was a little more different. It was based on a problem of practice that they were working through, where this one is based more on their building goals and the action steps that they have. So it just feels a little bit closer, a little, for lack of a better way of describing, more intimate to the work that they're doing. The process for providing feedback too is different. When we come back from observing the classrooms, we sit and discuss in small groups, so the groups that went around and observed classrooms together come to consensus with what they see, and then we'll report out based on the 3 areas that we were asked to look for, and that's an instruction, assessment, and climate. So yes, the 2 processes are very similar, and again, I happen to personally prefer this one.
On a philosophical, from a philosophical standpoint, they both processes make sense. One of the things I seem to remember as feedback from the old process, and it sort of goes with what you said to bring up the questions, was there was a notion that it was a safe space. So in other words, even though you have people coming to observe, it is not there's not a punitive action surrounding the observation. And instead, it's much more an instructional and a camaraderie that can form from that. Do you feel the same way at this point?
I do, and I feel even more so. And having that opportunity to dialogue in a smaller group with members from the building team and come to consensus as to what's presented, I think that makes that even safer. So it's not one voice. I remember being in a rounds session where we actually went around person to person and shared individual reflections. So this one, again, I think the conversation shifts a little bit, feels safer because it is the smaller group consensus, and again, based on those look-fors that the team shared with us just before we're going into the classrooms. And like I said, of course, there's that initial anxiousness, but for every visit that I have participated in, and Mrs. Gould sends surveys to the buildings after we're gone to get additional feedback on what the team thought about it, we have heard overwhelmingly, like this is something that our colleagues need to also experience. Yesterday at Fairfax, the building leadership team members were saying, when you come back in February, maybe the setup should be that we're teaching and other teachers are doing the observations as another way for them to have the experience.
Thank you.
So also with additional measures, we have our curricular-based assessment, so that ties back to the district adopted materials. So these 2 slides, so this one actually looks at performance of our first graders on their first math unit exam. So this is here to show you how we're using technology to help analyze the data and make it easier for us to interpret one of our internal measures. So math expressions is the board adopted curriculum, and just like when we were in school and you had the section quiz or the chapter test, the unit exam is similar to that, so it's a chunk of material that the students are then scored on. So like our similar to our state measure, we can separate performance. But the big piece here that we're looking at is under the summary piece. So we can see that 357 students have taken the test, which is almost 100% of our first graders, that 23% of them have not yet mastered all of the material, and 77% of them have. So again, when we think about setting our own measures or looking at what we value, this is directly tied to our instruction, and it is immediately actionable. So, right, so we can take this, we can look ahead to Unit 2, see what standards are going to be taught again, see which ones are not, to see if we might need to intervene with students a little bit earlier. So that's an example of Unit 1.
What are the different color gradients represented in this chart?
So the different colors are set up with the same or similar language to the state test, where I believe green is advanced, the light green is, I believe so. I think the yellow is proficient, the orange is, I want to say, it's either basic or like below proficient, and then maybe basic level. I can print the like the more detailed report that has it on there. I just don't happen to remember offhand.
But it's mastered versus not mastered, and then within those there are different gradients. Because that's what that would have implied. Okay.
So this is an example of like a grade 4, where we'll see here, this one is still in progress. So all of our students have not yet completed or completed the test or have entered their scores. But again, so I wanted to show you one from the early or elementary level and then one farther up in the tested level, because our goal is to have these in place K to 12 in the area of English language arts, mathematics, and science, and then once we complete the social studies adoption to include social studies as well.
So, can you go back, so the way the software works, is there a way, or is there some kind of analysis that you can look at where we see a student that has, let's say, consistently been at the advanced level, and then that one particular student now starts tanking the test, and we can do some intervention with that student?
Absolutely, we can drill down to the individual student level, we can look at it like classroom or grade level by building, or looking at it as a whole, for the district.
Well, going down that rabbit hole, does it also give you the ability, because obviously students are constantly changing who their instructors are over time. Are you able to go into data and if you see, for example, I got 28 students in the red, would it give you the ability to then go back and see who if there's any kind of pattern as far as their teachers in the past, for example, to identify if there's a commonality, for example, perhaps an instructor in some portion of these students' common history isn't impacting the right kind of information? Is there ability to pull that out as well?
The answer to your question is yes, that's possible.
Okay.
Secondary to that is it's not the purpose of using the system. We are working very hard to use it as a tool that helps instruction and that feels safe to our teachers and to our principals. And not use it in a punitive measure that people are not doing. I understand. I just want to make sure that is clear, because that's a hurdle. Just in the same way when we say we're doing school visits and we're visiting classrooms, the best way that we can demonstrate to people that it isn't punitive is in our actions. So yes, the system absolutely has the capacity to do that, but that is not how we are intending or working to use it. The idea is to have internal measures that we can look at in addition to the externals like our state.
Well, I didn't mean it to be punitive, but what I'm saying is what I'm looking for is commonalities in regard to, ways to boost the performance. It's okay.
So our first go-to, I understand your question. So our first go-to in that would be to look at amount of time for instruction. So actually this came up at our grade level meetings last week, where teachers were concerned about performance, saying, they wish they had a little bit more time, or they wanted to reteach some things. Okay, we know that. We can move forward. It's not an assault on teacher. Assault is the wrong word. That's not what you were suggesting. But it's not to be used to say as if, like Mrs. Jones is doing something incorrectly. We're also going to use it to look at the curricular tools. So is there a particular standard that's being measured that isn't very deeply enough for students to have a certain level of mastery during the first unit? Do we see it come up again in the second unit? Or are there other opportunities to demonstrate that mastery over time? So those would be some of the first things that we look at.
Okay, I'm not going to belabor the point. I mean, I understand what you're saying, and the reality is you don't want to use a punitive measure. I'm reflecting on my own personal history as well, realizing that I'm not going to go further down because 795 will file a grievance, but I wanted to see how you could use the data. Thank you.
The second of the 3 report card components is the Prepare for Success measure. So this is a newer component, and like the K-3 measure that looks at performance in the early grades, Prepare for Success looks at performance of students beyond state testing at the high school level. So this is measures calculated using the cohort model, and that's based on when students enter high school. So here's a chart that hopefully helps that make sense. So a student's cohort is based on the date and the year that they began the 9th grade. So students who came in let's say in July of 2014 or after July of 2014, and expected to graduate in 4 years, they become members of the class of 2018. So if they are on track to graduate, then they are now 12th graders. So again, same thing, class of 2017 or the 2017 cohort, they started school after July 1 of 2013.
Well, if we look at this, so when they enter, let's just say that right now, we could have an analysis relative to, say, the class of 18, 19, and 20, in terms of where they are.
Yes.
So that we can say, we can project now how many of our class of 2018 are seniors.
Yes.
We know what percentage that is. Share with us, what is that?
All the questions I answered.
Okay, go ahead.
I can provide you with a complete report. I believe that's not one of the
I'm just curious because-
In March, though, with your graduate report, that was one of the things that came up.
Yeah, I'm curious because it seems to me that one of the things that we're trying to get to is to be able to make some projections and maybe define interventions too.
Absolutely. So when we're looking at this measure, districts or schools earn point for every student that meets one of the 3 criteria on the left-hand side of the page. So earning an honors diploma or remediation-free scores on the SAT or the ACT, or earning industry credentials. And those are traditionally earned through our career technical programs. And then districts and schools can earn additional points looking at the measures on the right-hand side. So this is performance on advanced placement or AP tests, earning college credit through dual enrollment or college credit plus programs, or the performance on IB or international baccalaureate tests. Just as a side note, we're not penalized because we don't offer the IB test at our high school level. It's just one way for students to earn additional points if they have one on the left-hand side. Again, this reflects performance for the classes of 2015 and the class of 2016. Our overall performance in this measure was an F. When we look at performance across the state, we can see a majority of the scores fall between the D and the F, or in the D range. When we look at Cuyahoga County, there's a little bit better distribution. Most of the scores are chunked in the B, C, and F range. And then for first ring districts, you can see the majority of this districts performed in the F.
Is there any speculation as to why? You can go back, please. In the other chart, we saw the lower ratings were over one, wasn't unusual. On this one, we see the F ratings only 15% for the state, a little bit more for Cuyahoga County, but the inner rings are over half. What is the speculative reason as to why that is?
I haven't had any conversations with other first-ranking districts to find that out. I can only speak to some of the things that we've seen here.
Okay, then what I guess in regard to our poor performance on that, what do we speculatively attribute it to?
So when we go back and we look at the earning an honors diploma, the criteria for that, so the state just recently expanded, as we did with 3 options before, and now there are 6 different options where students can earn that diploma. I think some of or 2 of the biggest challenges is the 4 years of mathematics, with the 4th year being in it, and add advanced coursework. So we're talking about pre-calculus, AP statistics, AP calculus, and science. To earn a traditional diploma, you only need 3 credits or 3 years of science in order to graduate. To get the honors diploma, you need 4 years, including 2 units in an advanced science. So again, with our course offerings, we're looking at an advanced placement biology or an advanced placement physics or chemistry course. Other points for an honors diploma across the different options is a 3.5 GPA on a 4-point scale. And then when we look at the remediation free score on the ACT or the SAT, have data going back 5 years for our ACT performance. And we are, our average performance, let's say in English, is a 19, so we're actually above the remediation-free score. But in the area of mathematics, our average is 19.7, so below. And in order to earn the point for the remediation-free score, we're located in all of the sub-scores, reading, English, and mathematics.
So then, correct me, I'm just trying to understand the math behind, the other tests, you fairly, okay, you take the test, here's the score. This one is applying a mathematical value to these variables, correct?
So similar to what we see when we're looking at the achievement measure, and we look at the indicators met and who passed the test or who's proficient or higher or not. So like for the ACT, SAT, they use that remediation-free score as it would be comparable. It's like a proficient level.
The remediation-free score is based on a statewide average or something else? What's it based on?
The Ohio Department of Higher Education works with Ohio universities to set those scores. And for the use in this measure, I think the least complicated way to say it, the bar or the remediation-free score is set by February of the junior year for students. So it can change based on the conversations between the Ohio Department of Higher Education and state colleges and universities, but they must land on a score. The Ohio Department of Education must identify the remediation score by the February of students' junior year.
So when they make admissions decisions, they actually look at SAT and ACT scores potentially to decide what math class you're going to be placed in?
Yes.
Why would you think that the ACT score in English is lower than the one in mathematics when English seems to be one of the toughest things for people to deal with at the collegiate level? But I guess math is too, so I won't forget that.
Okay. Just for your knowledge and understanding, in the presentation where you see the text in blue, it is a hyperlink for additional information. So if community members wanted to understand more about the college and career readiness test and the what are those remediation-free scores, the links are there so you can see the same information. Or where we were here with the honors diploma, takes you right to the Department of Education site where we can see the 6 different categories, 6 different types of diplomas. The information that I was just sharing about the specifics within each one, so the revised criteria, you can see the chart there. We're again working to share the information and make sure that people know what some of the targets are.
But I guess, just for my own clarification, perhaps, but the prepare for success isn't just, okay, here's how the scores are in math. This is basically taking these variables, coming up with some sort of formula, and then, okay, so in reality, it seems like, the proficiency exams are already awkward enough as they are. This seems to add another level of more confusion. Then you said you didn't have any information from our peer systems in regard to the first ring. Do you have any thoughts as to why we're doing? You can't say for the other first rings, but why? What's hurting us? What's dinging us more on this one than
industry.
other systems? I guess it seems like this seems to really hit the inner ring suburbs more than the other peers or other segments. Is there? What would you speculate under that?
I would go back to the examples that I provided. So when we look at what's involved with each one of those 3 criteria, we have fewer students who meet the requirements and awards an honors diploma. We have fewer students who reach that remediation-free score compared to other schools or districts in the state.
So theoretically, then that's that's a commonality. It has a potential to be a commonality amongst the other. That may be a commonality that more adversely impacts the interring suburbs than it does the Russet County or the state as a whole.
That could be.
Can we go back to the cohort model slide? we have?
This.
No, a couple, yeah, forward. One forward. That one. So, I mean, just looking at this, it would be helpful to understand. I mean, I'm looking at industry credentials. We have a lot of kids that, taking the ACT, taking the SAT. I mean, in my daughter's class 2 years ago, there was no, I mean, the school didn't even have them take the PSAT test. It seems like we've really beefed up our industry credentials, or we're in the process of beefing those up. I mean, we have a lot of kids that aren't going to go to college. That's a great choice. I know our career tech program has been expanding. They've been adding credentials. I mean, is it safe to say that I mean, I know we're throwing resources at it. If we're throwing resources at it, do we see in other school districts like ours that we can get over this hump and score better on this measurement if we focus more on that particular area?
Agreed.
Yes.
Yeah.
But we are focused on the industry credentials. We're really laser-like focused on that right now.
I think today we are.
Just for people
Right.
Right.
who may not be aware of what industry credentials are, so I stated earlier, these are usually earned through career technical education programs. So some examples, so we have students who participate in our cosmetology program, when they take and pass their state boards, so that's the test that allows them to be licensed cosmetologists, then they have earned the credential, they earn the points, and would earn us a point for prepared success. But more importantly, they also set themselves on a path where they can, take care of themselves and, their future families. You've got students who work with Mr. Porter in our auto tech courses, so there are multiple industry credentials that can be earned. You've got brakes, electronic systems, suspensions and steering, so those are examples of certifications or credentials that students can earn. Through Mr. Lemon's course, the criminal justice program, students can earn peace officer training. So part of our work is making sure that students and families are aware of these options and that, we're having these conversations with them earlier. We actually did some shifting of resources to include a counselor at the middle school level to help with that multi-year planning and making students even more aware of their options, not just in middle school, but in high school. So yes, we are working to shift our resources and make sure that people have a better understanding of their options beyond high school, which is the purpose of the component, but we're not doing it just because of the component.
Yeah. Good.
Thank you, Allison. I think to add to that too, just as a reminder, one of the reasons we have this particular measure, because a lot of the college institutions were pushing back on the K-12 institutions and saying that your kids are not ready when they come to us. So this was a way to say that our students are leaving high school prepared to be proficient and not take all the remedial courses in colleges, because we look at the number of students, not particularly our students, but the number of students in the state who are going to colleges and not taking freshman comp 101, they're taking a lot of remediation courses and not getting credit for them. And so you have students that are saying, well, I'm spending a lot of dollars on my grants and my student loans and I'm not getting credits for these courses. So now these institutions are pushing back on the K-12 schools and say, hey, that's the district's fault. Well, so now this extra measure is saying, okay, when your students graduate from your high schools, are they prepared to be successful in the industry based on their CTE tests they're taking? When they get to college campuses, are they ready for the rigor on these campuses? So that's part of the reason that new measure has been added.
So though connected to the Prepare for Success measure, another internal measure is looking at the number of students who are enrolling completing advanced placement classes and sitting for the advanced placement test. Now, for the component, this is a secondary measure, so we don't automatically receive it. But what we know is students are more likely to not only attend but to complete college when they have exposure to advanced placement and or international baccalaureate classes. So we can see here, and part of the uptick in the number of students, the number of students taking AP exams and the number of AP exams taken is in part with our partnership with Equal Opportunity Schools. So this was actually an organization that we became aware of through our connection with INSAN. So this is, again, one of our more internal measures. We are proud of the increase in the number of students participating in those, not only participating in the classes, but also taking the time to take tests.
If the student takes the exam, you can go back, please. Student takes the exam, the AP exam. We had 356 exams taken. How many of them earned the AP credit?
So earning an AP credit for most colleges or universities requires a 3 or higher.
Okay.
This particular one, I don't have the percentage of students who earned a 3 or higher, but I can get that to you.
I'd be curious, thank you.
Yeah, and along with that, there's been some stories that have been shared with the board where we had cohorts of kids that we actually set our counselors out to get them to take AP classes. I'd be real curious to see how well we performed on the AP score 1 through 5 in 2016 versus 2017. So we had a whole new batch of kids taking them, and it's obvious that there's a larger number, which is great. But how well did they do?
Right.
So I'd be curious to see how they did.
And just only for my own edification, because I didn't take any AP classes. The 260, that would be just seniors, or is that juniors and seniors?
That can actually be any grade
Okay.
level, 9
Okay.
through 12, depending on the course that's taken. So we have our first entry, actually 10, 11th, or 12th. Our first entry for advanced placement is in grade 10.
Okay.
Students take AP US history. It's usually the first traditional course.
The reason I asked was because if we're graduating approximately 400 students, and we had 260 students take an AP exam, that seems like, whoa, that's like well over half of our student population. But that's why I was curious to see, because I was like, whoa, that's very impressive. Conversely, I'm skeptical
And I can
about
provide a
that.
breakdown of courses, the grade levels.
I'd be
students
curious,
who
yes.
take different courses.
Thank you.
Yeah, and just remember too, when we entered this partnership with Equal Opportunities in Schools, it was not necessarily to get more kids to make high scores on the AP exams, but to give our students the opportunity to take more rigor.
Oh, right.
Right, so that's going to be important when we get this data, to see how many students believe in themselves and are confident enough to take the more difficult classes with the district providing the safety nets too. So they went through an entire process where they had identified teachers in their buildings that could assist, and we had summer programs, et cetera. So it was a collective effort with the district and the teachers to be able to provide this opportunity for our
So,
students.
the reason I asked the question regarding the passage rate was only because a friend of mine at Heights, his father was a professor at Cleveland, between taking classes at Cleveland State and a whole litany of AP exams, he placed I think he double majored at Rice in 3 years. So that was the whole,
Yeah.
it's the ability for students to, I know we have a lot of other programs as well, the ability to accelerate your collegiate career, as well as when we're talking about student debt, the ability to contain costs as well.
And I can't believe you take an AP course.
I take any AP exams, that's for sure.
But connecting right to what Mr. Silverman is saying, so we have advanced placement tests, which are one way for students and families to reduce college credit or college costs. College Credit Plus is another means to do that. And this is where students have the opportunity to earn both high school credit and college credit for courses that they're taking. They can do that either on our campus, right here at Heights High with our teachers, or they can actually go to the college campus and take classes there. And they are free of charge to the students. So when we look at...
You say free at public institutions, but private institutions also, like John Carroll, offer them free too, or we end up paying for that?
Well, there's a partnership that we
Yeah.
have with John
The Carroll,
Carroll.
yeah.
So
So we actually
there
pay
is
something.
there is a cost. But again, we absorb that cost, it's not one
Right.
directly to the student. So this looks at the number of college credit plus courses that have been completed by our students over the last 3 years. So this is, again, not just kids who have enrolled, but the number of courses that have actually been completed and that they earn the credit for and earn the grades for. So we're very proud of that number there. Again, this is one of those things that from the component perspective, we may not earn points for, but we know can make a significant difference. And it can be dramatic, but in the lives of the students and families because it can reduce costs while they're still in high school.
Are you able to give us the number of students who've enrolled in the CCP courses? Because, the whole reason I ask, if I got one kid who takes 5, it's going to have much more of an impact than a student who takes 1. So I'd be curious to see if the 502 courses completed, if that was 100 kids taking 5 or 500 kids taking 1.
Certainly can. I had courses broken down by fall, spring, and summer semester.
Hey, I am not afraid of the data.
We can certainly get that for you.
That's good.
All right, so our last component is the graduation rate component. And this one is pretty straightforward. It looks at the number of students who complete their high school requirements and earn a diploma in 4 or 5 years. So like Prepare for Success, it uses the cohort model, and it is delayed. So the 2016-2017 report card actually shows performance for the class of 2016 and the class of 2015. So when we think
Okay,
about,
so Allison, hold on a sec. Just so the data that we look at for the other 5 measures are for this past year, but this is actually skipping a year. It goes back 2 years.
so Prepare for Success and graduation rate, go back. Everything else is for the current year.
Okay.
So the other 4 are current year. So we look at performance compared to a target. So what you have here are just the ranges to earn a particular letter grade on the component. So we earned a C for our 4-year graduation rate. So that was for the class of 2016 with graduating 85.6% of the class in 4 years. And understandably so, you can see the 5-year graduation rate, the range for the letter grade shifts a little bit because there's more time.
So our grade, I mean, so the 85.6 on the back slide is actually our actual, oh, I get it, okay.
Our actual.
I see it now.
Again, this is a snapshot of the report card.
I would suggest that before you post this online, if you could add in the graduation year on slide 3, that'd be good, because it gives people a reference point.
So when we think about performance over time, we can see that over on the diagram on the right-hand side, where the red line represents the 5-year performance and the blue line represents the 4-year. Making comparisons to others, we do see that a majority of the districts across the state are falling in that A and B range. When we look into Cuyahoga County, we see the same pattern. And then when we look to First Grade, we see them chunked more in the B, C range.
And this is 4-year graduation rate comparison?
This is the combination of the two. So this is the overall grade that you see at the top. So the component grade is based on those 2 measures. It combines them.
Okay. So can you go back a sec? I mean, okay, so in pretty much all the other measurements, the 50% was more like in the CD range. I mean, where the state decided to classify an A, a B, a C. Why? I mean, where do they come up with the A's? I still don't understand that.
Well, I think it's, we got, the other one's more, this one's more just your students who graduate.
Yeah.
I would wager to say too, because I've been a critic of the idea that if a student moves out of your system and you lose
Right.
track of him, it counts against you in your score.
Yeah.
I think the smaller,
Go to that cohort screen.
Yeah. I think
Go
you're
all the way back to the cohort screen, which she tells us,
I
which is,
apologize if this
I'm
is
sorry.
dizzy.
Yes.
I think the-
So remember, wait,
I
just,
think the rural districts. have-
so remember this screen here, okay? So The data she just showed us are the students that started in 2013, okay? I'm sorry.
2000.
I'm sorry,
The
2000,
beige,
the beige.
2012.
So the number of students that start, so if we have 500 students that start in 2011 and 500 students that started in 2012, that's where the clock starts. So we need to graduate 500 students in 15 and 500 students in 16 based on the number of students who entered in ninth grade. You get it? Because that can get you to 100% graduation in 15 and 16 because you graduated every ninth grader who entered your system during that year, during that cohort. That's when the clock starts.
And it's not just
Starts.
the numbers match, it's the actual students.
Right.
And you follow the path and performance.
Right. So when students leave our district, then yeah, if they transfer out, we have to show documentation that that student left and went somewhere else. And if that student is behind, then we say, okay, we can graduate that student in that 5-year cohort. So we were able to put systems in place to capture those students who didn't graduate in the 4-year and gave them a year to graduate. But it's very important that students that enter our district in the 9th grade, that we track those students with success to graduation within the 4 years.
Well, that does create a question. It's something that I remember because we had the same issue 20 years ago, is that at that time period, the 9th grade was the largest, because you mentioned 500 students in the 9th grade.
Yeah, just the right.
Our graduating classes are not even 400 students. The question I was posed is, at that time, we had a significant retention problem where students would matriculate through the middle schools, they'd hit the high school, and we had a retention problem. So the 9th grade spiked up in enrollment. It was our biggest grade of the entire system because we were holding students back because they weren't able, they had a challenge with the high school model versus the middle school model. The question I would pose is that when you're saying, I'm assuming 500 may be just a number.
Yeah, I just threw a number.
Okay, then that may
Yes,
address my
yeah,
concern
yeah.
because that does actually create my new question then. If we do have a component of a 9th grade retention, let's say you're holding 30 students back, if you will, who do a second year in the 9th grade, if you will. Does that, in the cohort model, do those students then get put from, let's say, the class of 15 into the class of 16? They stay in the cohort, okay. So that then, in effect, they're captured in the 5-year model versus the old model.
And we're deemed in a 4-year model.
Because the reason, at that time, we had like with the state's old model, we had a 50% graduation rate, while Beechwood had like 110%, because all they did was they took the simple numbers and they just divided them. In this case, you're actually truly following them as a.
Correct.
Okay, and the 500 was just an example.
Yeah, just threw that out,
Okay.
yes. Yeah.
Individual by individual. So this takes us to, not so much a separate internal measure because graduation is graduation. However, but it is an area where we are leveraging technology so that we know how students are performing and what additional supports are needed. So we have what we call data views, which collect some of our key data points and make it easily accessible to our staff teams. So we're looking at total credits earned. So when we go back to your point where we have seen that the 9th grade is an area where students don't meet the credit requirements to transition from 9th grade to 10th grade, and be considered sophomores. So we're monitoring that. We're looking at test performance because we know the new graduation requirements. Students earn points for graduation based on how they do on the tests. And of course, attendance. So looking at who's attending, how frequently we have any challenges with that. So in an effort to prevent that 9th grade retention, we are in the 2nd year of middle school to high school transition program. The acronym is ECRI, and of course,
Exploring College Readiness Institute.
Exploring College Readiness Institute. Thank you, Mrs. Bowman. Is the acronym there, but the high school team works with the middle school team to identify students to receive coming in additional support. So things like tutoring, work on organizational and social skill development. Those are all ways that we're trying to be more proactive with students coming in as opposed to being reactive. We are continuing with our closing the CHUH gap group here at the high school, which is another way to try to support students who may fall behind in terms of their credit accumulation. And then we're also continuing to expand our options program, so that's housed over at the Delisle Center. I was at a meeting yesterday with Dr. Williams, and I believe he said that they've graduated over 300 students to date, so they work to use technology in our online curriculum to get students, to accelerate the pace at which students earn high school credit, to get them back on track for graduation.
How common is the options program? I mean, how common is a program like options in other systems, and in particular the entering suburbs?
I don't know how many of the entering districts have them. I know that a handful of years ago, before we started our program, Southeast Lyndhurst had one that was similar with their architect program. But I would have to investigate. I hate to
I was
down
just
that one. I know for certain I worked with some of the folks in that program.
No, the reason I think options has been, someone was referencing Taylor Academy. I was like, Taylor Academy and options are that similar, maybe nugget of idea, but vastly different programs. And I think options has been a tremendous success. That's what I was curious to see if we're unique in this, or if there's other systems who are exploring similar programs.
Other districts are definitely exploring them.
Yeah.
I participated in a state testing meeting in Westerville, so we actually have it at their online program location. So it's not a novel idea. And I think what we're saying that is shifting is it's not just used for credit accumulation, but also as a school of choice. So it's just a different means for students to have their high school experience. So I think that would be the next step in how we might expand that, now just using it for credit
It's
accumulation.
the only small schools left, one could say.
I described it that way. So that is the final three of our 6 components on the report card, 2016-2017 report card. And I just want to close hitting on what are the key pieces that we're focusing on in 2017-2018. We have our plan. We believe that it is working. We are on the right path. We're in the 3rd year of the 5-year plan. And we are focused on finding evidence of student learning and quality of instruction. We have a structure through the Ohio improvement process that allows us to review data and provide feedback. And as you've seen, we are working on greater balance with those external measures and our own internal.
Any other questions?
Yeah, Allison, I have a question, and it's a few slides back about the math expression for as the students that were not mastered, that didn't master the 31%. How do we circle back to make sure that those students are able to master this? I know, I see here that they have, like in Unit 1, how many different units would
So
they cover?
The total number of units vary slightly depending on the grade. And for instance, I was at Oxford meeting with a 5th grade teacher, and there are 8 units for the 5th grade. I don't think there are not as many for the lower grades. So we look at it in 2 parts, because some of the standards will come in again. So the lessons will continue, or the students will have multiple opportunities to be exposed to that content before they are retested. And then sometimes, maybe not, or the amount of time for the lesson is not enough to really intervene and give kids what they need. So our schools have different setups for how they provide that intervention. We have additional support in the form of title leads. So for English language arts and for mathematics, we use terms like push in. So we have another adult that might come into the classroom and provide support for students. Or we might use a pull-out model where small groups of students are taken out of the classroom for a short period of time to be provided with additional support. We have different ways of approaching that depending on the area of concern and how much time is needed in order to boost students.
I see, thank you.
I think we have to take a lot of these things with a grain of salt. I'm disappointed in how we look on the cohort model, and I only say that in just how we sort of are compared. I know that the district is doing things to improve upon that, as well as all the things here, but I know that there's some energy that's being spent on that. It's very complicated when you look at these numbers that they're 2 years back. So I think it's really complicated. But, you know, and Beverly and I are the two board members that are standing, and we'll be sitting here next year when we look at this again. We're going to be real curious to see where we sit with that. There's a op-ed piece that was written by the North Olmsted superintendent that called this taxpayer funded scheme of putting together these test rankings a colossal waste of taxpayer money. I think that's the actual title, and it was either Cleveland.com. It was in one of the William Phyllis's blogs. But he sort of outlined exactly what was wrong with the state testing process. And we don't need to go into there, but it was a very articulate, detailed analysis of, you keep on changing the tests. I mean, how can you compare one year against the other? And then when you look at this, when essentially everybody's getting D's and F's and C's, I mean, that's the norm. And then they're used punitively against us to take dollars away from our kids. It's just really very frustrating. But thank you. It's really good to see how the numbers come together, see how we compare with like districts, how we compare with everybody in the state. I think this is, I think anybody that stands up and rallies either, you know, for our public schools or against our public schools need to look at this information.
We will have multiple updates as the year goes on with how students are performing, again, with our internal measures, because we do believe that that is an advantage of our overall performance and the culture of excellence that we
Allison, so maybe an unfair question for you or an unfair question for this work session, but let's just for a moment. If we back away from this for a moment and say, first, let me stick with it for a moment. The notion of, I'm going to still highlight the notion of the continuity of strong internal measures, I think is really the most important thing. And just as if we align our standards beyond the state standards or beyond whatever set of standards in which we're going to be judged, and that's probably the best method, in my opinion, to further student achievement in these areas. But now let me go back to the unfair question because I did not answer. So if we all acknowledge that students are more than a set of scores on exams of any kind, and we all acknowledge that if we're trying to really come up with any sort of causality, it's much more that you have to look at than simply how students did on exams or how teachers taught exams or how classrooms did on exams or how there's social things, there's growth, other growth areas that we as a school district have always elevated as important. I guess at some point it would be interesting to know how we're keeping that more holistic look in place, because this is overwhelming in many respects, and trying to keep up with it is overwhelming in many respects. And clearly there's political pressure, and clearly there's financial pressure that is associated with this. But if our reason for being is doing what's best for the students of our community, then we owe it to ourselves to take that step back and say, what is it we need to be doing to have the full approach of, again, you can't just look at these scores and say, oh, well, then what if we put resources here and resources here? There's also a whole bunch of support structures that have nothing to do directly with the scores they get. So I guess I'm not necessarily asking questions as much as just being sure that there's a structure in place to be sure that we take that step back and put this in that context.
Yes, keep pushing. And as a person who was graduating, I had an opportunity to participate in the arts. I learned how to play 2 instruments.
You learned how to play.
I was not an athlete, so that was not my thing, but still to have those opportunities, learn a world language. So yes, and. I think our first step in looking at it or in terms of reporting the information was to begin with the internal match for the quantitative information that we have, while still building on those other pieces. It's why we still continue with, IB and making sure that we look at, children and our staff members as a whole, right? And not just limited to the school. We are very much concerned about the experiences that they're having, and it's a balance. People will go, you are the director of data, so if you really wanted to, you would just not have us take these tests. We have to find a balance.
Yeah.
There is. It's not that one is any more or less important than the other. I believe that we can demonstrate excellence across areas. So the next time, again, if we continue to include our internal measures, we can do more of those that aren't necessarily captured by a single
Right.
internal.
And I guess maybe I'm just speaking about myself because maybe other people don't have this need, but I guess I always feel like it's important if rather than framing this and then saying how it fits in, I guess almost I like the top-down approach of saying, this is our focus. And here's this portion of it and how we're building up this, but always reminding not just our community, but our students. Because I think the group that doesn't ever get polled are the students. I mean, in fact, that's actually not true. We've done that, and we actually have polled them. But is to say, so what is it you need that we can provide you to be successful? And that's why oftentimes also I'll talk about longitudinal. Talking about AP scores and having more people take AP exams is all fine, but how's it really helping them to achieve the end goal? So I just would always I think it's overwhelming with all this, and so I just want to keep it in our collective radar that the most important thing is what are we providing for the overall success.
Yes, and I will use this as an opportunity to plug our students, our high school students who are participating in IMSAN in particular, because
Right,
we are
that's actually
going to
great.
host
Yes.
the National Students Conference. So
That's
tomorrow,
Yes.
our students and our IMSAN advisors will be hosting a couple hundred students from across the nation to have dialogue about their experience as students of colors or allies of students of colors who are working to navigate our current system.
Yes.
Thank you.
And that
Thank
is
you.
not be
Thank
captured
you.
in a test score.
Right.
Thank you for
That's
bringing
good.
that up.
That's good. All right. President.
Anything else?
Thank you, Alex.
I'll accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Mr. Gaynor? Yes.
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 Okay.
Yes.
We're adjourned.